Now that you guys have a little bit of an idea of what we're expecting with where to put some of the additional notes, for speed's sake, I'm going to kind of back off exactly typing them off in the margin, but I'll make sure that you know exactly where they go, and I'll make sure that I repeat um, specifically what the actual question is. And we'll kind of play around with this a little bit to see what works best for everyone involved. So, to start off with, I want to look at the two major civilizations within the 15th century. And this is going to be China and Europe. And you will see that they are at kind of two different places. But even though they're at two different places, they do have some parallels that we're going to be able to draw upon. So, to start off with, you want to make sure that you highlight here this first sentence that by the 15th century CE, a majority of the world's populations lived within a major civilization. And then you want to put down here right next to it, actually, just go ahead and put it right here. Put that they live in either a city centered or a state based society. They lived in either a city centered or a state based society. And the big one that we're going to be dealing with, of course, is going to be Ming China. Now, there's a little bit of a backstory with Ming China that we'll be able to get into with a video or a PowerPoint or both here. Um, but with Ming China, you want to put down here right next to A, just put it right here where the arrow is, that prior to the Ming, China was in decline. The Ming dynasty is a period of recovery. And I'll say that one more time. Prior to the Ming, China was in decline. The Ming dynasty is a period of recovery. Now, some of this, again, we'll kind of touch on not only in this chapter, but also in others, because their problems are going to be mentioned in a couple different places. But you also want to make sure you go ahead and you highlight that China had been badly disrupted by Mongol rule and the plague. One of the things with China is that they will kind of be almost like this secular existence. Like you'll have a dynasty come in, they'll be absolutely fantastic, and then bad times will hit, and then boom, another dynasty is going to come in. And that is pretty much what is happening here. We're just simply picking up China at the end of its last bad period, and we're picking it up during its next recovery. So you want to go ahead and you want to highlight here that the recovery is under the Ming Dynasty. And this dynasty is a fairly long-lasting dynasty. We're talking, just shy of 300 years. So this is something that, is fairly substantial. Um, these guys are going to be doing a couple different things. And again, we'll talk more detail later on. But you want to make sure that you highlight that they had an effort to eliminate all signs of foreign rule. In other words, and this is the little note that you want to add right here underneath 2A, that they're very ethnocentric. They are very ethnocentric. And ethnocentric is spelled Ethnocentric. And one of the things that you'll see here also is that very much there is an attempt to go back to the glory days of China, go back to things and resurrect things that they see as quintessentially Chinese and get rid of anything and everything that has this sense of foreignness. So you also want to make sure you highlight that there's a promotion of Confucian learning. Besides going and promoting Confucian learning, which again is probably like the hallmark of what it is to be a Chinese dynasty, these guys are also going to reestablish the civil service examination system. And they are also going to create a highly centralized government within which great power is going to be given to the court eunuchs. Now, little side note here, you want to underline eunuch, okay? And then over on the side, somewhere in this area, do you want to put down here? And this is going to sound a little weird, but I'll kind of fill you in on why here in a moment. But you want to put here, please, that high-ranking members of court had to be eunuchs, and eunuchs is spelled over here, had to be eunuchs, as they were not a threat. As they were not a threat. What it means to be a eunuch is that a eunuch is a castrated male. And previously, really early on in Chinese history, there had been instances where really close advisors to, and really powerful advisors to the emperor would use their position to overthrow and eventually kill the emperor so then they could establish their own dynasty for themselves and their sons. So, what they ultimately do well before the Ming Dynasty is almost kind of make it a job requirement that if you wanted to hold one of these high positions, you had to make sure that there was no threat of you attempting to establish a dynasty and rule and create some type of legacy for your sons. So, this, by the way, is going to continue well into the 20th century. Actually, the practice of these high officials being eunuchs isn't going to end until 1921. I mean, can you imagine, the stuff that you have to do for a job? But it also is a big leg up, not only for the individual, but also for the individual's family as well. Not only are the court eunuchs going to have a lot of power, but they're also going to do a lot of other things as well. The state is going to restore land to cultivation. They're going to construct waterworks, planted perhaps 1 billion trees. Again, we're really kind of pushing the whole revival, but we're also going to start to get into some maritime ventures. What we're going to have is pretty much a more impressive version of what the Europeans are going to do a little bit later in the 15th century. So what's going to happen is that Chinese sailors and traders had already become important in the South China Sea and Southeast Asian ports in the 11th century. China, well before this, already had an impressive array of trading and economic ventures. They're just going to try to find kind of another way to do things, but also another means by which they can do things. So what ends up happening, again, continue to highlight what I highlight, that Emperor Yongle is going to commission a massive fleet that he launched at the beginning of the 15th century in 1405. Again, Columbus doesn't set sail until 1492, so the Chinese are really a number of years, nearly a century ahead of what the Europeans are. However, the Chinese government is going to abruptly stop these voyages in 1433 and really regarded them as a waste of resources. Now, we kind of have a little bit bigger note that needs to go here with C underneath number 5. And this will kind of come to explain why the Chinese are going to so abruptly stop their missions and why they see that this is really simply, in their minds, a waste of resources. So the note that I want you to put down here next to C underneath number 5 here, right, where I'm pointing, you can either put it over here in the margin, or if you write really small, you might be able to put it over here. But, completely and totally your call. But you want to put down here that the Chinese didn't want to conquer territories. The Chinese didn't want to conquer territories, establish settlements, or spread culture. They just wanted to trade. This was seen as a waste of resources because there was no return on investment. Okay? So basically, what the Chinese government are doing with these explorations is that they're just kind of going out for the sake of going out. There's no desire to conquer. Really, all they want to do is try to make trade connections, see if they can find some far flung places that have some really cool stuff that maybe they can in the future trade with. So there's no real big return on this super huge investment that the Chinese government has put in to this massive fleet and supplying them and paying them and doing all these other things. So once Yongle dies, all of a sudden they look at this expense and they go, "Well, really, we're not getting anything back from it." So they just end up recalling the fleet. They park them and they just simply let the boats rot. The Chinese merchants and craftsmen do, however, continue to settle and trade in Japan, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Southeast Asia, but this is going to be without government support. In fact, it's going to be illegal. And it's not just a slap on the wrist, hey, you shouldn't be doing this illegal. We're talking punishment is death if they catch you illegal. To the point where like Chinese government officials will be sent, especially to the Philippines, because there's going to be a large Chinese population there and they will pull these illegal Chinese merchants out of their shops, drag them into the middle of the street, and just simply execute them right then and there. So these guys are not playing around at all. In general, what the Ming are, and you want to put this again, it is somewhere down here towards the bottom before we go into the next section, before capital B, European comparisons, which are on the next page. But you want to put a note down here because this is kind of important for the overall theme of the Ming Dynasty. And in fact, even after you get it down, you want to make sure you put a star by it as well. That the Ming was a throwback to more successful times. The Ming was a throwback to more successful times. And then, guys, like I said before, make sure you put a star by that. Again, the Ming want to resurrect their former glories. So they're going to go back and they're going to copy a lot of the same elements that they believe made China great before the Mongols, who are foreigners, showed up and took over, and at least in the Ming mind, kind of messed everything up. Within Europe, we have a similar set of circumstances or a similar situation that is going on as was going on within China. We're going to have some state building, we're going to have some cultural renewal, although it definitely will go on at a different pace and at different times. Because let's face it, China is one singular country, where Europe you're going to see is broken up into several dozen highly competitive states. So Europe is just going to have a different vibe, but there will be some similar instances that we can kind of draw some parallels with. So in here with Europe, again, you want to highlight what I highlight. There's a similar process of demographic recovery, consolidation, cultural flowering, and European expansion that took place in Western Europe. The European population is going to begin to rise again round about 1450, give or take a little bit. And the little note I need you to add just right here at the end of number 2, just put down towards the end of the plague. Towards the end of the plague. I mean, the plague is definitely going to slow down and hinder development, but it doesn't completely and totally crush it. But once the plague is minimized or in some cases completely goes bye-byes, then you'll see that this cultural flourishing and state building can kind of take its greatest forms. We also, just like in China, have state building, but it's fragmented. And again, the reason why it's fragmented, like I said before, is that Western Europe in particular is made up of many independent and competitive states. And in fact, and the little note here I need you to add next to 3, and it doesn't matter whether it's over here in the margin or over here. You do you. It doesn't matter wherever it is that you can find space. Do you want to put, please, here next to 3, that much of the state building much of the state building was driven by needs of war, was driven by needs of war. You're going to see one of the major ideas that pushes and continues to push the European states is going to be this competitive nature. And one of the ultimate forms of competition, of course, is going to be war. I mean, the easiest way to settle your differences is going to be to try to beat the living crap out of your next door neighbor. Well, you need an army and you need all of the organization and requirements that an army needs. And the only way that you meet that is by having a strong, stable, centralized state. So you have to remove this fragmentation that existed in the Middle Ages and kind of create these single, solitary, centralized governments in order to kind of feed the war machine in kind of a roundabout way. We also here are going to have a cultural renewal, and in Europe, this is going to be the Renaissance, which is a reclamation of classical Greek traditions. Um, you want to put down, because this is also something that I don't want you to get confused with, and you sort of kind of put it here next to number 4. Again, this isn't a very big note. Do you want to put, please, here that the Renaissance culture was urban and upper class. The Renaissance culture was urban and upper class. In other words, in order to participate in this European Renaissance, and to be quite honest with you, in order to participate in the social and cultural movements that are going to go on until well into the 1900s, you have to be two things. You have to be wealthy and you have to be educated. And the only way that you're going to be educated at this point until the end of the 1800s is for you to be wealthy. So the vast majority of the people within Western Europe, even those that live within the cities, are not going to know that this cultural renewal is going on. But it begins in the commercial cities of Italy, round about the middle of the 14th century to about 1500, give or take a little bit, and of course will continue into the following century. And this here for them is really returning to the sources as a cultural standard to imitate. And the sources that we are returning to, or rather that they are returning to, and you want to put down just over here next to B, and just put this in parentheses, just put the Greeks and the Romans, the Greeks and the Romans. The Renaissance here, very similar to the Ming Dynasty, is a look back where China is looking back to themselves prior to when the Mongols show up. The Renaissance Europeans are looking back to themselves prior to the Dark Ages, prior to the Middle Ages. And for them, it's going to be these Greeks and Romans that they think really kind of have their crap together artistically, culturally, and they want to copy what they're doing. They want to go ahead and they want to imitate it. One of the elements of this obviously is going to be art, and we'll deal with that a little bit later. But you're also going to have these scholars known as humanists who are going to explore secular topics in addition to religious matters. So they're going to be looking at things other than just simply religion. And this is going to allow us to fold into other intellectual movements, like, for example, the scientific revolution. A lot of those following cultural movements are really coming about because of this Renaissance activity that's going on. Renaissance thinkers also, and you want to highlight this as well, Renaissance thinkers are also more concerned with describing the world as it is rather than exploring eternal truth. So you want to put a star by that here next to number 6. And then also a little note that you can just tack on here to the end of 6, and it will definitely kind of explain a little bit more about the movement. Do you want to put, please, that they also have great interest They also have great interest in the individual, in the individual. So they're going to be concentrating on an individual's capacity to do things rather than like this group type of mentality. And you'll see it in their art, you'll see it in their literature, you'll see it pretty much in everything that the Renaissance ends up doing. One of the big points of comparison that or one of the additional points of comparison, I should probably say, that we can make between the Chinese and the Europeans is their maritime voyaging, is them going out and hitting to sea. Now, again, Chinese start quite a bit earlier. It's going to be for the Europeans, it's going to be the Portuguese who begin their voyages of discovery in 1450. So again, a little bit slower. And again, some of these other things we'll talk about later. We're in 1492, Columbus reached the Americas. Vasco da Gama is going to reach India by sailing around Africa 5 years after that. Um, these European voyages are going to be very small in comparison to what the Chinese will do. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that when we actually do the Age of Discovery in chapter 13 and also in chapter 14. The big difference here is, and you want to highlight number 5, is unlike the Chinese voyages, the Europeans were seeking wealth, converts, and allies in the crusade against Islam. More generally, what these guys are looking for, what the Europeans are looking for, you want to put this down here as a note next to number 5. Again, you can put it over here or you can put it over on the other side, go back and forth, wherever it is that you think that you can fit the note in. But you want to put down here next to number 5, and this is something that we'll talk about next 2 chapters as well. Do you want to put, please, here that the Europeans are motivated by the 3 G's, as in the letter G. The Europeans are motivated by the 3 G's of glory, God, and gold. Of glory, God, and gold. And then you want to add to that note that China had no such motives. China had no such motives. Remember, the only thing that the Chinese want to do is just simply trade. And, once that emperor who thought that this was a good idea dies, everybody kind of goes and acknowledges that maybe that was, a little bit of a waste of resources. And some other things here that are going to be different from the way the Europeans handle their business. And again, we'll deal with this in more detail in a later chapter, is that Europeans, of course, are going to use violence in order to carve out their empires. I mean, these guys are taking over what they are, at least in their minds, discovering. But we do have some differences here. I mean, the obvious one is that the Chinese voyages ended while the European ones kept escalating. And this is a really, really big difference. So next to number 7 here, do you want to make sure that you put a star by it? In fact, maybe put, a couple of them. One of the reasons why the Europeans are going to continue, and you want to highlight what I highlight, is that there's no overarching political authority in Europe to end the voyages. If one country would end voyages, say that, when the Portuguese end their voyages, because the European nations are so competitive with one another European country, like, say, for example, the English or the Dutch or the French, is going to step into the void. So there's no one entity, unlike in China, that can just simply go and pull the plug on exploration, say, okay, enough of this crap, we're done with it. And, like I kind of said there, is that rivalry between the states is going to encourage more exploration. Once Portugal finds some really cool things, well, then Spain wants to go out and find some really cool things. And then so do the English and the Dutch and the French, because they constantly want to be at the same level, if not better, than their neighboring countries. There's also much more where in Europe where the urban elites are interested in overseas expansion. They're going to see that this could be an advantage to them. So they're going to explore these. So they are going to support these explorations, where that is not the case within China. And you're going to see that these explorations are actually going to exploit that European elite interest as well. There's also just a different vibe, and this sounds kind of like weird to say, but there is just simply a different vibe within China versus Europe. China has this feeling that they have everything that they needed, and the Europeans kind of understand that they don't. That during the Crusades, they were exposed to some really, really awesome things coming from the East, and they want to get their hot little hands on it. So they're all about going and getting things from outside that they find cool, for lack of a better idea. Where China just has this idea that they are at the top of the heap, and there really isn't anything anyone else could possibly have that they don't have something equivalent or something better to. So why waste time, money, and effort going and trying to find those things that aren't necessarily as good as what they already have? The other issue here is, and this is going to sound, kind of weird, but China's food production could expand internally where the European system expanded by acquiring new lands. Here's the thing. China's big because of China's size, as its population grows, remember we have, more food, more people, more problems. And that first more problem is how do we feed these more people? China has the space that they can just simply expand their food production within China. Because Europe is substantially smaller than China, the only way that they are going to continue their food expansion is by getting more land. And they've kind of maxed out on the land that they have within Europe. So they're going to have to go outside if they want to continue to grow their population and feed that population.